All
Yeah,
right, sounds good.
thank you, Lindsay. Definitely with the questions, I think if you guys have them, we'll try to answer them and keep an eye on it as we go along. And if we don't get to it through, or if we don't see it, you want to re-ask, or we can check it at the end. We will be utilizing the chat box for certain things. So it is helpful to have all that. And I will recommend as well having a pen and paper, or at least some form, whether that's just writing it on notes on your computer. We will be doing a little activity that you'll need something to write something down with. So even if that's your phone and you want to text it or write stuff down, that works too, whatever form it looks like. And welcome, you guys. Thank you for showing up today, and thank you for joining us. We know this year has been crazy for all of us. So just you guys being here and taking the time to show up and be with us tonight is really special to us. And we feel so lucky and happy that we get to do this with you guys today. I am Laura Krosky, and then Alicia Snyder is going to co-facilitate with me today. And we will just go ahead and dive in and get going, because I know Lindsay's excited and ready to go.
Awesome. So, yeah, a little bit about us. As Laura mentioned, my name is Alicia Snyder, and we have our own little company called Forge Spirit. We are a coaching and consulting firm, been around since 2018. And a little story, a little bit about us and kind of why we have the name Forge Spirit is for us, we honor and we recognize that as humans, we're forged through the fires of life. I think 2020 has taught us that so much, just with everything that's come our way. And so we grow from that adversity. It ultimately helps us to discover who we are and shapes us, right, from all of that conflict. And so much of the work that we get to do and that we enjoy is really helping connect to that fire, right? Whether it's a fire that has been diminished in some capacity, maybe we're reigniting it, or for some of the individuals we get to work with, it's finding it for the very first time. So as Laura mentioned, we're very excited to be here with you all, go through these mental survival skills with you, and really just spend time with everyone as well, and just be with everyone, since it's so hard to do that these days. So what we're going to be focusing on the next hour, kind of going back to our name and the reasoning behind it, really connecting just kind of with that inner piece of us that we don't really get to spend a lot of time doing, or haven't been able to maybe make space for that as much as we want. So for the next hour, what we're going to be focusing on is we're going to be creating an awareness around our internal narrative and identify what that is. Such a big piece of the mental survival skills is really so much of kind of the internal dialogue that we carry with us about who we are, the situations, how they're impacting us, and the weight of that. We're going to develop an understanding of empathy and self-compassion and how they can be used as tools for difficult times. And we're going to learn how to shift that internal narrative. We're going to get in touch with it. We're going to figure what's going on there and shift it if necessary. If it's something that is maybe not supportive or helping us in any capacity, how do we shift that internal narrative to something that's going to be more supportive and encourages us to be more resilient?
Yeah, this is probably one of our slides that resonated the most with us, because we can feel this at its core. 2020 has been a stressful in so many different ways for majority of everyone in some form, whether it's the pandemic itself, the worldwide pandemic that's happening. People have lost jobs, we've lost people we've cared about, we've had volatile elections, we've had social injustice, we've had a lot of stuff happen in 1 year, and not even the full year. It just was, everything seemed to just happen kind of within this year. And so even if we have our own jobs and we're still working and we're lucky to have that, we still have this level of stress that's on our bodies because of the year that we're in. Whether we realize that or not, our bodies are under constant stress. So I think as we also look to this year, what we've also seen is we've had probably never before in our lifetimes have we had something like quarantine happen, where we actually are told to stay home and not go out and be with each other. We can't go into restaurants like we normally would. We have to socially distance. And all of those things, even if it's for a greater good, affects ourselves and our beings and our way of connecting with each other. So we've actually lost the physical connection that we get to have with each other. And that in and of itself can create loneliness and a feeling of being lost and not being connected in the way we want, which is why these mental survival skills are so vital and so important for us as we go through the end of this year and wrapping it up and understanding that 2020 is going to be over in a few weeks. But that doesn't mean that all of this stress the year has brought us is going to just dissipate with that. So it's really understanding, how do we help ourselves? How do we learn how to get through this? How do we have resilience as we grow? And so I think a lot of times what we also think about is we think about the physical effects that stress has on us, and we don't even think about the mental and emotional side of things. So that's really why Alicia and I wanted to talk about mental survival skills. And I think we can also put mental/emotional survival skills, because that's what this is here to help with. We're here to give you guys some tools and some skills that will help you as you process everything that's been going on this year and anything else that might be coming up for us as we move into 2021, which hopefully it won't be as stressful as this year is, but we never know, right? If anything, 2020 has taught us, you never know what's going to happen in the year. You can start the year with so much hope and possibility, but you really don't have any idea what's going to happen. So we're going to utilize the chat box right now. And we just want to ask you guys, how has 2020 been for you? Because we want to ask you and check in, because we do know that some people have had loss and grief and hard things happen. And there's also been some people that have been able to, they feel a little different. Maybe they're working from home and that's something they've wanted to do for the past year, or maybe they're getting to spend more time with their family that they've been craving. So just share with us, maybe in one word or a few words, how you're feeling about 2020. Illuminating. I love that word, by the way. A time of self-reflection, grateful, peaceful, overwhelmed. I feel like reading these words, I've felt all of these things at least at some point this year. Unsure, yep. Lonely, empowering, overwhelmed, anxious, uncertain, exhilarating. I think just seeing these words too, it just shows us the full range of what humans can experience in a year like 2020. Reflective, accomplished, excited, and scared. I love the duality. Roller coaster, yeah. Oh, that's a good one, yeah. Learn what matters most and count my blessing, yeah. That's like priority shifting, right? Revelatory, yep. My hubby is a homebody, I'm not. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So being with someone that is like loving being at home, and if you're like, I just want to see people and be around people, that can be hard. I bet he is. It's like every homebody and introvert's dream right now. Hard year, yeah.
Yeah, I think to Laura's point, right? It's nerves on edge at times. Yeah, I think just in the chat alone, we can just see the whole spectrum of emotions just in this chat with just these 25, 27 people on here. Lisa says halted, frustrated. I know even myself, I'm a mom, I have 3 children, and we're so, distance learning at home, working from home. And I have felt just over maybe even just the last week, these wave of emotions of gratitude for the more family time, gratitude for the position that we're in the midst of everything that's happening around us. And then, yeah, at times the ambiguity of how everything's going to shake out. And, we talked about internal narrative, and I find myself constantly having to replay, okay, we're in a pandemic. This is going on. This is going on. The kids are home. We're working from home, just as a reminder of all the difficult things that are going on. Because sometimes we kind of get involved into the day to day, and I think we tend to forget, as Laura mentioned earlier, just all the stresses and all the pressures that are constantly around us right now. And if we lose sight of that and we don't keep that top of mind, sometimes it can crush us. It can be very hard for us to hold all that, and be able to take care of ourselves. Nikki says, great for business, but lonely at times. Yeah. And, a lot of people on the opposite end of that are unemployed, right? And so it's just such an interesting, crazy year that I'm sure as we move further and further away from it, we'll be studying and learning from even just years to come. So, without a doubt, right, 2020 has definitely had its fair share of what we call disruptors, right? Disruptors of just normal everyday life. And, whether you've gone through this year mostly grateful, exhilarating, right? We've seen a lot of really great words. There's probably been some points, right, where there's been a lot of fear, right? Fear of the unknown, fear of the uncertainty, fear of the impact just that everything is having. And so in this next section, we're going to talk a little bit about fear and how it creeps up into us and kind of the different stories that we may tell ourselves or that we may hold when it comes to these difficult times. So Laura and I want to share a quote with you that we're a huge fan of. And so this comes from Cheryl Strayed, the author of Wild. Not sure if anyone in this group is familiar with it, but great book. Mm-hmm. And so a shortened version of a quote from that book is, fear to a great extent is born of a story we tell ourselves. And I think the continuation of this quote is, and so I chose to tell myself a different story, right? So there's a lot of stuff that's going on around us, and we have this internal narrative that we create around the situation or the different stressors that have crept into our lives. But we may not be able to change the external circumstances, but we definitely can change how they impact and how they creep into our life and the weight that we feel from them. And so fear, right? The story that we tell ourselves, our brains love a good story, right? Our brains, the number one thing that our brain is trying to do for us is keep us alive and keep us safe. And so when something happens that's startling, that's difficult, that doesn't feel great, that doesn't feel safe, our brain takes the first crack at it and goes, okay, this thing just happened, right? This pandemic just happened, or whatever example you want to put into the mix. What does this mean for us? Are we safe? Are we not safe? Do we want to run? Do we want to fight, right? Kind of that whole fight, flight, or freeze piece of it. And so our brains are hardwired for stories. They are story creating machines. It will take the little bit of information that's around us and we'll construct a story based off of whatever information and whatever data that we have. The problem with that is that our brains will accept whatever story we construct, no matter how accurate it is. And one thing that we've been really practicing a lot this year is really tapping into what's the story we're telling ourselves about the situation, or what's the story that we are telling ourselves about the struggling that we're in, right? And how is that shaping our feelings? How is that shaping how we're moving through the year, how we're even moving through just situations just in general? So we're going to do an activity like Laura mentioned. This is where you're going to need that pen, that paper, that phone, whatever instrument you have to write something down on. And what we invite you to do is we invite you to take a moment. We're going to take about 2 to 3 minutes to do this. And we're going to do an activity that we call the story we tell ourselves. So on whatever writing device you have, you're literally going to start this out by saying, the story I'm telling myself is. Now, this story is going to be a stream of consciousness. We don't want to overthink it. We don't want to make it perfect. We're not looking for perfection here. We're just looking for raw, honest, unfiltered truth. And this story could be the story you're telling yourself about today. If today was really difficult, could be the story you're telling yourself about the week. If the week has been hard, or the year, right? You get to choose. This is your activity. This is your story. So for the next 2 to 3 minutes, go ahead, write down that internal narrative. The story I'm telling myself is ba 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 ba. Whatever surfaces for you. We'll give it about 1 more minute. All right. So that was a quick 2 to 3 minutes. In the chat, let us know, was that the first time doing that type of activity? Is that something that you've done for yourself previously? Let us know in the chat. Was that a first time for you, or something that you've done previously before? Did you have a first time? Yes, through journaling. Yeah, probably have done this or something very similar through journaling. Yeah, I've had time, I've thought about it, but not actually written it down. I've had time to reflect. Yeah, so a couple of first time writing it down. Yeah, it's so beneficial to write it down because it's in our heads, right? And it's kind of swirling around, it's playing in the background, or maybe it's a lot louder and it's not just in the background. But writing it down, right? Writing it down, talk to me about what was that like? Kind of taking it from the head and putting it onto either the paper or the phone. Yeah, what was that like writing it down?
Mm.
Yeah, taking a weight off.
Mm.
Makes me anxious. Yeah, definitely seeing that story sometimes can make us a little bit more anxious, right? Yeah, it makes it real, provides different perspective. Yeah, all of those are great. Story doesn't seem real, but neither does reality. Ain't that the truth?
Hmm.
I remember a while ago, I told Laura, we were talking about something, and I said, could you imagine if we were talking to somebody that was not of this world and told them everything that was going on? It would sound like a made up movie,
Hmm.
right? There's a pandemic and we're all at home, and it just wouldn't seem real to somebody that was outside of the impact. Bethany says, I don't like to be aware of what I'm telling myself. Yeah, sometimes the weight of it is crushing and putting it in front of you. Sometimes that's really hard, right? Especially if there's been a lot of difficult things that have been happening. If black and white allows focus on the issue and not reaction. It was raw, and as I wrote them down, I realized how that story in my head is a lie. Yeah, it goes back to the brain. A lot of the times, if we definitely encourage you to keep practicing this activity because it's been a lifesaver for me. I know Laura and I have talked so many times about how that's been a lifesaver. um, I remember having my third child. She's 18 months now, and suffering a lot of postpartum depression, which I didn't experience the first two times. Single-handedly, the story I tell myself activity helps surface a lot of that stuff and helped tremendously. So yeah, it allows us to focus on what's actually going on and not the reaction or all the emotions that are wrapped up into it. Gabby also says, I guess it takes to write it down to realize how much I am sabotaging myself.
Hmm.
If you had asked me the same question 4 years ago, the answer would have been full of despair. Meditation and affirmations have helped me develop a much more positive outlook in my life and in
It's
general.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful. Yeah, for the comments, right, about like sabotaging or lies, right? We talked about that brain. The brain is going to take its first crack as to what's going on. And sometimes the stories that we tell ourselves, there is a lot of things that are not true. And there are a lot of things in our story that's not saving us or serving us anymore.
Mhm.
Right? So how do we shift away from that narrative to be more supportive, to help make us more resilient instead of making us more reserved, right? Or kind of keeping us down.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I've used, this is probably pre 2020 because I've been using this a lot more and just with every situation that comes up. But I used to use this a lot when I would have situations with other people, especially when I worked inside an organization and I would get lit up or fired or ready to go, do the whole like, let's go, you want to duke this out kind of thing. And I would have to pull myself back and do this kind of exercise of what is the story I'm telling myself about this situation. And one of the biggest things that actually helped me do that is to create and cultivate this skill of empathy. And the reason why that was so important in those moments is it made me realize that I have this own story that's going on in my head. And just like many of you were saying, it's typically filled with a lot of lies. There may be truth and some truth in it, but most of the time it's lies that we're telling ourselves for self-sabotage. And so it helped me pull myself out of my story and be able to recognize that the other person that I'm looking at or struggling with or fighting with or disagreeing with also has their own narrative that's going on in their head and playing into how they show up in the world. So, ways that we can cultivate empathy, and I think all of us understand that we need more empathy in the world right now. We need more empathy with each other. We need more leaders that lead with empathy. The more we have that, the greater it feels like our world could be and will be. And so many times we think of empathy as a thing that's you either have it or you don't, or we think of it as a finite resource that you only have so much to give to people, when in reality empathy is something that we can grow and learn, and the more we have it for other people, the more we're able to show up again and over and over and over, and the different outlook that we get to have on the world. So the 5 things that we talk about with empathy, as you can see them on the slides here, is we have perspective taking, non-judgment, recognizing emotions, communicating emotions, and then mindfulness. And how these look is when we're with someone that needs empathy, and I think we've all experienced that in this year, you know, with everything lost that's going on for people and the heaviness and the stress of 2020, we all have had to show up or try to show up in an empathetic way for each other. So the first thing, oh, and just to clarify, this is based off of Teresa Weissman and Kristen Neff's work. So this is where we got the 5 kind of definitions of what empathy is. So perspective taking. This is being able to take on a different perspective, being able to understand someone else's story and what's going on for them. So just like we just did for you guys, right? You wrote out your story you're telling yourself. This is almost in a way jumping into that and saying, okay, this person has their own story. Let me show up, let me listen to them, and let me hear their story. And then 2, that falls into let me show up with non-judgment. Empathy is not showing up and listening to their perspective and then in your head thinking, well, I know they're wrong and I'm right, or whatever that looks like, right? It's showing up with no judgment on what you think their truth is or how you think they should be living their life. So it's being able to show up in a way where you can just show up and say, okay, what does this mean for them? What is their truth that's in this story for them? And how can I continue to show up? And then 3, it's recognizing the emotion that they're conveying in their story. And sometimes that also means if you're struggling with understanding the emotion that's coming up for them, it's understanding or getting clarity around that. So asking them questions, being able to hold space for them and say, even saying, what is the emotions that you're feeling right now? And we have emotions because oftentimes it's more than one emotion that a person is feeling. It's many that they're feeling throughout their body. Some might be stronger than other, or some they might not be able to name, but there's a lot. So being able to talk through it and being able to have them clarify it can help you. Because then what you get to do as a person that gets to show up empathetically for someone else is you get to communicate the emotions. So you get to start talking with them. And empathy is not something, it's not stepping into someone else's shoes and understanding their story or even understanding the situation. We can be empathetic for someone and have no idea, not be able to fully understand the full story. What it is connecting to the emotion that that person is feeling and connecting to that inside of ourselves. Because I think we've all felt sadness, we've all felt overwhelm, right? Those emotions we were writing in the chat before of how we were feeling in 2020 is a good sign of that. How many of you were reading the words people were writing and you were agreeing or feeling that? So that's what empathy is. It's tapping into that emotion that you've also felt and being able to show up for that person. And the reason we also have number 5 and mindfulness is because we have to be mindful about sitting in that emotion and that discomfort with someone, but also being able to understand where you begin and they end. So that being of, you're not taking on their feelings and their emotions for them. That's not empathy. You're sitting there and being there with them, but you also know it's not for you to take on and take from them. And so we want to show up in an empathetic way and be present in someone's pain and be able to show up and create connection, because that's what we're all kind of craving a little bit more of this year, is to fully connect with people. And I think some ways we're shifting our priorities of what true connection looks like and feels like. And that's how empathy can help us. It creates more of this deep connection with people. And if we can hone this skill and cultivate this skill, this will also help us in turn as we look at doing this for ourselves. Because I'm sure some of you were probably looking at empathy and you're probably thinking, oh yeah, I got that. I can do that. I can hold space for people. I can do that hard sitting in uncomfortable emotions and hold someone's hand if that's what they need. but maybe you don't show up for other people, or maybe you show up for other people, but you don't show up for yourself in the same way. So as we move from empathy, we look at noticing, and it's noticing and recognizing and working with ourselves in order to empathize with others. But empathy also is a version of self-compassion. And once we can create and understand the skill of empathy for others, it's really us learning, how do we show up and have self-compassion for ourselves? Because that's really what we need more of. We need to be able to take care of ourselves and understand our needs and where we need to take care of ourselves so that we can fully show up with other people in empathy. So as we move into self-compassion, we have the 3 elements of self-compassion. And this is from the work of Kristen Neff. And she has, just great resources when it comes to self-compassion. She has a book on self-compassion, and she talks about the 3 elements of self-compassion. So as you can see, we have 3 different things here. Oh, and Alicia also put in the box, there's a test you can take, which is, it's so good just because it gives you some clarity around where you are in your self-compassion for yourself, and just how you actually show up for yourself. Because so much of self-compassion, if you're good at empathy, it's really just taking how you would show up empathetically for another person and showing up that way for yourself. So if we look at the 3 elements, we have common humanity, self-compassion, and mindfulness. So common humanity. So in her terms, so if you were to take the test, you're going to see some results that say common humanity versus isolation, which I think we all kind of know what isolation feels like currently, or have experienced probably more this year. And self-compassion involves recognizing the suffering and the personal inadequacies that is part of the shared human experience. It's, you're not alone in your suffering and what's happening. Other people have suffered and felt these things before, and you're not alone. There is this greater element of the common humanity. And maybe that's one thing that actually 2020 has given us as a gift. It might be a little easier for us to look at common humanity and see that so many of us have struggled this year. And being able to physically see that all around us can help us understand this element of common humanity and how it's important to connect with that so that we don't feel that isolation. We don't feel alone in that. And then self-compassion versus self-judgment. So this is the other thing you'll see on the test once you take it. And you're going to get scores, and it'll rate how you do in each of these areas. And self-compassion versus self-judgment, I think it's kind of self-explanatory. It's probably the first one we think about, right? It's this idea of the self-criticism, that feeling of, I need to do better. I need to do something differently. I can't fail. I can't show up that way. But self-compassion, the opposite side of that, when we cultivate that, is it's being warm and understanding with ourselves. It's understanding that when we suffer, when we fail, when we feel inadequate, when we feel alone, rather than ignore and criticize it, it's that being gentle with ourselves. It's that saying of, this is part of being human. This is part of who we are and how we show up. And being imperfect and failing and experiencing life difficulties, it's inevitable, right? It's something that's going to happen to us. It's going to continually to happen to us, because if we're living our lives, we're going to have moments that are hard. And being able to cultivate that self-compassion part can really help you get through that. And then the mindfulness piece. So I kind of mentioned this in the empathy part, but it plays into the self-compassion as well. It's mindfulness versus the over-identification. So we look at non-judgment, receptive mind state in which we observe our thoughts and our feelings. So it's that idea of, I'm not my thoughts and my feelings, but I can observe my thoughts and my feelings. So there's a difference in how we do that, right? We want to be mindful that we're going through something, that we have that story that's going on for us, that we're feeling a certain way, but we want to say, I am feeling sad, not I am sad, right? Because we don't want to over identify with the actual emotions and feelings that we're having. So being very mindful about how we're showing up, how we're feeling, and how our behaviors play into it, so that we don't get caught up in that negative, reactive kind of state. So this helps us if we can cultivate this self-compassion, this love for ourselves. This can help us get to a place where we're not going to show up in a reactive way to our own feelings, to our own emotions, to our own quote unquote shortcomings. And then in turn, we can do the same for other people. We can show up with that mindfulness and become more understanding and less reactive to their own feelings and their own behaviors. All right, so rest. This is something that it's a vital form of self-care that so many people don't realize is a form of self-care. I think a lot of times when we think of rest, we think of, or self-care, we think of bubble bath, and we think of, like the basic ones that you always hear about, the fluffy ones in a way. They're all good and they can be great for us, and they can be a form of rest for us. But it's important to understand, especially in a year that's as stressful as 2020 has been for us, it's important for us to understand and prioritize what rest might look like for ourselves. It is a vital part of self-care. It is understanding when it's time for us to move, to be productive, to get things done, and when it's time for us to cocoon, when it's time for us to slow down, when it's time for us to maybe even watch something mindlessly, whatever that is, whatever form of rest. So I want you guys to put in the chat, when you think about the word rest, what does rest look like for you? What are different ways that you cultivate rest? And when we're thinking of rest, right, it's not just sleep, can be a way of rest. Cuddling with my daughter. Oh, I love that. Mine's cuddling with my dogs. What else? Reading. Great one too. Being in nature. Yep, I think we all can feel that one. Snuggling with my cats. Hiking. Yep. Yoga. Yeah. Walking my dog. Hot bath. Walk with my dog. Watching movie with my son. Laying my head down. Be still, silent, and focus on breathing. Love that. Deep breaths. Painting. Yeah, I love all of these answers. Kayaking. I mean, you see the broad range of what we need, and some of you have broad ranges in just your answers, right? Self-care. I mean, sometimes it's rest for that day. All we can do is just deep breaths, slow down, let ourselves breathe, and actually feel the breath.
Yeah, so self-care is a good segue into watching a good show. Absolutely. I was on a Sons of Anarchy binge for a really long time. That was totally my method of rest as well. If you're a Sons of Anarchy fan, let me know. So a sheet that we like to use that we wanted to share with you, and the 3 elements of self-compassion, and this worksheet that's in front of you, this slide that's in front of you. If you go to Forge Spirit, there's a resource tab. We'll put it in the chat as well, but you can download all these for free and use them if you feel like that would be helpful to you. But as Laura mentioned, right, like we have self-care, and even the things that we've listed in the chat, these are all amazing things. But we always like to challenge and encourage to think about kind of these 4 buckets, right? Spiritual, physical, emotional, intellectual. And what are some activities that you can engage in that really fill up these 4 buckets for you, right? Such a huge piece Laura mentioned of self-compassion is that self-care, and being able to rest and fill up our buckets, whether that bucket is physical, spiritual. So taking a moment, we're not going to have time to do it today, but really encourage you to take a moment and think about like what fills you up in these areas. And there may be activities that fill up, all of these buckets for you, like hiking. Hiking can definitely be a physical and emotional, spiritual and intellectual release for you, right? For me, I always think about cooking. Cooking's huge, being in the kitchen, making great food for my family. That is literally my church, right? So it hits all 4 of these components for myself. So, as the year continues and we don't know what 2021 looks like, but thinking of activities beyond even what we typically engage when it comes to self-care, and sitting down and thinking, yeah, actually just being quiet and still, that does emotional and spiritual things for me. I'm very extroverted. I love being around people typically, but what I have found within the last couple months was, which is kind of shocking to me, is sometimes when all the kids go to sleep, I really enjoy just the darkness, just sitting in our loft with the lights off and just quiet and stillness, which if you would have told me that years ago, I would have never believed you. But it really gives me a time to kind of process everything that's going on. So for you, what are those 4 buckets? How do you fill up those 4 buckets? What are some cross activities that maybe go into the different areas? And how do you lean into more of those activities and move into them when we're feeling very overwhelmed? So our last activity that we're going to do with our last couple of moments is what we like to call a self-compassion letter. So if you think about the narrative that you first wrote down when we did the story you tell yourself activity, some of those stories were a little negative, or just not as supportive as we would like them to be or need them to be. Or maybe your story was, right? Maybe it was a great story. But we want to see if there's an opportunity to even make it grow even more. So with the same device that you were using before, we want you to write a letter. So write a letter as if you were talking to a trusted friend, right? Self-compassion is all about talking to ourselves the way that we would talk to somebody that we love that's feeling despair, right? So write a letter to a trusted friend who is struggling in the same way that you are. Could be struggling with the day, a specific component that's going on within the life or the year. And in that letter, what words of compassion, of support would you offer to them? What would you tell that friend if they were dealing with the same struggles, the same anxieties, the same sadness that you were dealing with? So we'll give that just a couple minutes. And if you don't get to finish, that's fine. We encourage you to do this even after our talk today. We'll take about 2 minutes. So we're at that 2-minute mark. Go ahead. If you didn't get a chance to finish it all, like we said, we encourage you to definitely take time and write it. If you did write it, what were some of the things that you told your friend? What were some of the pieces that you put into that letter? This activity can be so beneficial because oftentimes how we would comfort somebody that we care so much about is usually not the way that we would comfort ourselves, right? So Brittany says, told them they're doing the best they can in the situation. Yes, so many of us, right? We're doing the best that we can with everything that's been thrown at us. But yet in moments where we're hurting, right, or we're struggling, that's not our first go-to, right? It can be, if we can definitely build that skill, but it's just typically not the first thing that we go to. Bethany says, just like you've overcome everything else, you will overcome this as well. Yeah, that's absolutely. Oh, you are not lost. Your journey is just beginning. I love that. It's beautiful. Yeah, so much of this year has been shaken up for us, and we're not lost. It's not the ending of things. If anything, it's just the beginning, right? It's the beginning of a new journey.
Yeah, I had some sent to me privately too, and it's okay to feel those emotions and feel and release. So those are other things that you told a good friend.
Yes. Definitely keep this self-compassion letter handy. It's great. It's great in times where, we encourage you to do the story you tell yourself activity often when you're feeling down or even feeling off, right? It doesn't have to be a major thing that's going on. And if it's really hard to come from a place of self-compassion after reading that story or that narrative,
Mhm.
how would you approach that situation if it was a friend coming to you, right? How do you channel that self-compassion letter? Yes, I have this, like I said, I have this on repeat on the daily, constantly telling myself, you're at home with 3 kids and you're working, you're doing the best that you can. As somebody mentioned, we're going to get through this. It's going to be okay. It's not going to be hard all the time, right? So just replacing that more negative internal narrative with something that's a little bit more reassuring, and just kind of put some lightness around it.
Yeah, and I think it's good to like note too how understanding the self-care portion of it and what you need, you might be able to write that story down and then you might have to put it aside for the rest of the day and come back to it later that night. Or maybe it's you need to do that, write down that story and do the self-compassion letter right after. But understanding that for yourself on what feels right for you and what you're ready to receive and really taking care of yourself. I mean, sometimes it might be the story seems so big and so heavy that you need to go out and do that thing that holds all of that self-care together, the spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, and understanding what that is. So then you can come back and write a self-compassionate letter to yourself and create a different ending to the story that you started with.
Yeah, we're going to kick it back over to Lindsay. But for us, we just want to say thank you. Thank you for allowing us to spend the evening with you this last hour and sharing and allowing us to just be with you all. We are, same as Lindsay, going to be starting a YouTube channel as well with just some small informational videos. So we hope that you engage with us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, or you're always welcome to check out forgespirit.com, where we try to upload just a bunch of different resources and materials that could just be helpful. So thank you all so much.
Yes, thank you all. We appreciate all of you guys and the vulnerability that you showed and shared in the chat today.
Awesome. I just want to say personally, thank you, ladies. I'm excited to take some of these tools and start utilizing them in my own life. Hopefully next year is not quite as hard on all of us, but I feel like we can be a little bit better prepared now. I know you guys are big fans of Brene Brown. Have you read Glennon Doyle's new book?
Oh yeah.
So I
Untamed.
kept thinking about, you can do hard things. That's like
Yeah.
sort of been my personal affirmation
Yeah.
this year, because I think that, you know, we all have hard things, and that hard thing looks different for everybody. But I think that, you know, if you know you can do it, we can tell our minds a lot of things. And I think that if we tell ourselves we can do it, we can do it. If that, yeah. So I just want to say thank you guys for reaching out, for taking time to, you know, share your guys' expertise with us. And this was just really excellent. So I know you guys were going to do a giveaway. So if you guys want to pick, we have 23 people on here. So if you guys want to pick a number between 1 and 23, and we'll pick a winner. And do you want to let them know what you guys were giving away? I think it was was it a consultation?
We have a couple of workshops that will be coming out in the beginning of the year. Yeah, and so winner will be a free entry to any one of those workshops that they want to participate in.
Oh, we have a bunch of numbers. What do you guys pick, a number 1 through 23? I have a bunch. Well, we'll take or we can take the first one. Somebody said 7. So let's see.
Let's do that.
Yeah, I was actually thinking 7, so that works.
Oh, wow. Perfect. Okay. Well, Kika is our winner. So Kika, if you want to, Kika, why don't you message me and I will forward your information to these lovely ladies.
Lindsay.
Yeah.
I was just typing. This is so funny because 7 is my lucky number.
No
Mine
way.
too.
I am not kidding.
Well, that was the first number that popped up in the chat. So it's just.
Thank you, Nicole.
Yeah. Right. Awesome. Cool. And I think, yeah, and if you guys want, we'll share your YouTube video and we'll link our video up to your YouTube and stuff too. So you guys will be able to find this tomorrow. If you want to share it with other people, if you found it informative, it'll be uploaded on our Facebook group tomorrow and on our YouTube channel in the next week. So again, just thank you guys so much. And if anybody's looking to reach out to these ladies, you can find them on Facebook and Instagram, or you can reach out to us. So
yes, thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
guys. Thank you, ladies. This was
ladies.
great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks
Thank
everybody
you all.
for joining. Have a wonderful evening.